Hello, grade 12s. Welcome back from that short break that we've just had. Just to recap on what we were busy with before the ad break or before the short break, we were looking at the money market and the different bankers' acceptances that we find under this particular market. So we spoke about the short-term company debentures, treasury bills, the Reserve Bank debentures as well, short-term government bonds, and then also we made a point that the South African Reserve Bank is a key institution in the money market. Remember, for banks to function or if they need money, they have to go to the Reserve Bank, and the bank will charge them a repo rate for money, or for the banks taking out money from the Reserve Bank. And then when we go to the banks to apply for a loan, then we get charged the interest rate on the money that we have taken out. So the Reserve Bank plays a very important role, and actually later on there's a section where we focus on the Reserve Bank and the different functions of the Reserve Bank, as it is a key institution in the money market. Then we move on to the capital market. This is more long-term deposits. So money market is short-term and capital market is more long-term. So here we're dealing with long-term deposits and borrowings. For example, the mortgage bond. If you want to buy a property and you do not have the required money to pay up front, you have to approach the capital market in order to take out a mortgage bond or loan in order to purchase a property. That's long term, because often it takes you about 15 to 20 years to pay back the loan, plus the interest that is charged for that particular loan. And the JSE is a key institution in the capital market for mortgage bonds and stuff like that. So the JSE plays an important role. Okay, so remember, there's when we look at mortgage bonds, it's slightly different from a home loan that you will just an individual home loan that you will take with one of the banks. But when you look at the JSE, they are the ones that really facilitate what happens in the capital market in terms of the deposits, the long-term deposits and borrowings that happen in that market. Then the foreign exchange market, receipts for exports and payments for imports. So when we export products to countries outside of South Africa, we need to keep note of what was sent out of the country. And also when we bring in items into the country, we need to keep note of what has been brought into the country. So that is very important. So here they will keep the receipts for exports and the payments that are made for the imports, because when you import, you have to pay because you are now going to another country and you are asking them to sell you their product, and therefore you have to pay them. But when we export, we get paid, but we have to produce or supply receipts so that we can have a proof of payment that the exports or the items that were sent out of the country have actually been paid for. Then the next point looks at the exchange rate, which is determined by demand and supply. Okay, so that's another very interesting topic, because if you are a matric student who's doing economics, you have to watch the news, especially when they're talking business and what's happening in the economy. You need to be up to date with the interest rates, just to know what the exchange rate, just the exchange rate in terms of the currency. You need to know how the rand is looking, when compared to other currencies like the pound, the dollar, if, for example, the pula in Botswana as well. So the exchange rate is determined by supply and demand. Okay, so then that's just a wrap with the different markets. So we've looked at the money market and the capital market, and then now we move on to the national account aggregates. Also a very important section, so please do pay good attention over the next couple of minutes. So the national account aggregates are methods that are used to determine the value of economic activity. Okay, so in order for us to come to a conclusion that we've had less growth and less economic activity, we need this information in order to be able to make those decisions. So we can't say our growth rate has been really bad this year as compared to 2012. We need to have tangible information that we can use in order to make this evaluation and also in order to support what we're saying when we're looking at economic activity. So obviously for us, if there's more economic activity, that is good for us because more people are employed. So there's a nice flow between production, income and spending. We looked at that at when we looked at the previous lesson, the relationship between production, income and spending. So when there's more economic activity, we get very excited because that means that people are working, they are able to earn an income and they're able to spend their money on the products, which means the goods and services that are offered by the producers. So it's important for us to understand the concept of economic activity. All right, so the production method, income method, and the expenditure method are the three different ways the economic activity is measured. So we've got three systems or methods that we can use. The first one being the production method. Then we've got the income method, and then we've got the expenditure method. So if we want to work out or to get the value of economic activity, we can use these three methods in order to determine that. So the production method, income method, and the expenditure method are the three different ways, ways to measure economic activity. They are all used at different times and for different purposes. Okay, so we can't always use a production method. We will use a production method for a specific reason because we want to determine certain information around the production. If we use the income method, it's because we want to be more focused on the income. If we use the expenditure method, we want to see what the expenditure looks like. What are we spending, in our economy in terms of imports and so on. Okay, so that is an important point to note, that they are all used at different times and also for different purposes. So it's not a generic system where you can say, it doesn't really matter whether you use the production, the income, or the expenditure. You've got to look at what is it that you are wanting to do with the information, what is your focus area, and then that will then determine which method will be more suitable for that outcome. Then moving on to our next point, we're looking at the GDP, the gross domestic product. So this refers to the total market value of all final goods and services produced within the boundaries of a country in a particular period of time, usually 1 year. So it is a total market value. So total market value of final goods. So we're not talking about semi-finished goods or goods that still need to be processed. So here we are talking about final goods that are ready to be consumed by the consumer. So not goods that still need to be processed further. So the process has been concluded. So it's important that you note that as well. And services produced within the boundaries. So it is within the or within the boundaries of a particular country. So we live in South Africa, so everything, all the goods and services that we produce within our country over a particular period of time will be then used to determine what our GDP is. And this is usually over 1 year. So in grade 11, you learned about the 3 methods of calculating GDP. So the stuff that you learn in grade 11 is also very important because it supports what we are doing currently in grade 12. So it's important that you understand the definition of what GDP is. Total market value, very important that you emphasize on that. And it's all about final goods and services produced within boundaries of a country in a particular period of time, and that is usually 1 year. So there are different ways to calculate the GDP. So we can use the expenditure method, the income method, or the production method. So let's get right into it. So these measures of economic activity are useful not only as an indicator of economic activity within a country, but also to determine the standard of living in a country. You know, we often get that, you know, South Africa is a developing country or a third, or as it used to be called, a third world country, but developing sounds more ideal to our current economic position. Because there's a lot of growth that's happening in our country, the infrastructure is improving, but then we've got to look at the standard of living, because for me, this is quite an interesting concept, because it's in order to see where the country is, you've got to look at how the people live. The issues around poverty, unemployment, play a very important role when it comes to the standard of living. So when you look at the standard of living in a developing country and that of a first world country, you will see that there is a huge difference in most cases. So that's a nice, interesting discussion that you could possibly have with your peers, people in your grade who are doing economics, or during group discussions. Also, you know, just if you're having a general conversation, you know, you could be sitting with friends over lunch. Let's talk more economic stuff, you know, instead of talking about social media and all this. So this will be more exciting and more informative in that regard. And also it's used to compare the prosperity levels between the countries. Hence, we were talking about the developing countries where there's a bit of both, where you still find that there are still issues that they're dealing with that are more of a third world. But sometimes they might have infrastructure that you find in a first world country. I often hear people when they come to South Africa and they say, "Ooh, guys, your roads are really good. Your national roads are in a good quality. Your motorways or your highways are good." So that's structures that you would usually find in a first world country, and they would be referred to as being good. So it's quite pleasing to hear when we get this sort of feedback that there are things that we are actually getting right in terms of international standards and trends as well. And also it is used to measure economic growth from 1 year to the next. And for me, this is a very important point. So I want you to note this. Because we often talk about economic growth and we look at whether our economy is shrinking when there's less economic activity happening. Obviously, then that's not a good sign for us, because we want more economic activity to happen so that people can get employment opportunities, people can have access to income so that they can spend when going to the producers and to the firms as well. So these are the 3 points that I want you to just take note of, and that we can use this to determine the standard of living, look at the prosperity levels between countries. That comparison is very important as well, that we can benchmark ourselves with countries that have a similar demographic and infrastructure as us, so that we can see where we are in terms of economic growth. Okay, so then we're going to move on to our next slide. So the national accounts are published by the South African Reserve Bank in the SARB quarterly publication, which is also available from Stats SA. So it's important that you are familiar with these websites, because there's some very nice, useful information that you can use. Also, if your school communicates with the Reserve Bank, they do send information on a regular basis whenever there has been some changes or stuff that they would like to report on. So it's also quite good to have access to this information because you can use it in your discussions as well. So the circular flow model is often referred to as the circular flow of income, expenditure, but it starts with production, okay? And I like that diagram that we used in our previous lesson when we were looking at the relationship between production, income, and spending, because now it shows us the actual circular flow, that you need to have income, expenditure, and also production, but it starts here with the production. And then from the production, it's income, and from the income, it's the expenditure that happens. So we're going to start with the production method. So the production takes place in the primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors. So please be aware of the different sectors of the economy. Primary sector is more involved with extracting raw material from the natural world or from the natural resources. Activities such as farming, fishing, forestry, and mining will fall under the primary sector. Secondary sector, it's all about processing the raw materials. So you process the raw materials into finished or semi-finished products. And then tertiary sector is all about rendering or providing services. However, we cannot merely add up all the market values of all outputs of all participants, because such a calculation will amount to double counting, okay? So we can't it can't be as easy as that we'll just add that and add that and add that and get our answer, because then we will be faced with the problem of double counting. So before I continue with this, let's take a short break, and then I'll catch you just after this.